Hi, boys. Welcome to another Daddy Cast. This is Exploring Insects with Uncle Paul, Week 7, The Old Pear Tree. Uncle Paul had just cut down a pear tree in the garden. The tree was old, its trunk ravaged by worms, and for several years it had not borne any fruit. It was to be replaced by another. The children found their Uncle Paul seated on the trunk of the pear tree. He was looking attentively at something. One, two, three, four, five, said he, tapping his finger upon the cross section of the felled tree. What was he counting? Come quick, he called. Come. The pear tree is waiting to tell you its story. It seems to have some curious things to tell you. The children burst out laughing. And what does the old pear tree wish to tell us? Asked Jules. Look here at the cut which I was careful to make very clean with the axe. Don't you see some rings in the wood, rings which begin around the marrow and keep getting larger and larger until they reach the bark? I see them, Jules replied. They are rings fitted one inside another. It looks a little like the circles that come just after throwing a stone into the water, remarked Claire. I see them too, by looking closely, chimed Emile. I must tell you, continued Uncle Paul, that those circles are called annual layers. Why annual, if you please? Because one is formed every year. One only, understand, neither more nor less. The learned, who spend their lives studying plants and who are called botanists, tell us that no doubt is possible on that point. From the moment the little tree springs from the seed to the time when the old tree dies, every year there is formed a ring, a layer of wood. This understood, let us count the layers of our pear tree. Uncle Paul took a pin to guide his counting. Emile, Jules, and Claire looked on attentively. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They counted thus up to 45 from the marrow to the bark. The trunk has 45 layers of wood, announced Uncle Paul. Who can tell me what that signifies? How old is the pear tree? That's not very hard, answered Jules, after what you have just told us. As it makes one ring every year, and we have counted 45, the pear tree must be 45 years old. What did I tell you? Cried Uncle Paul in triumph. Has not the pear tree talked? It has begun its history by telling us its age. Truly, the tree is 45 years old. What a singular thing, Jules exclaimed. You can know the age of a tree as if you saw its birth. You count the layers of wood, so many layers, so many years. One must be with you, uncle, to learn these things. And the other trees, oak, beech, chestnut, do they do the same? Absolutely the same. In our country, every tree counts 1 year for each layer. Count its layers, and you have its age. Oh, how sorry I am I did not know that the other day, put in Emile, when they cut down the big beech which was in the way on the edge of the road. Oh my, what a fine tree. It covered a whole field with its branches. It must have been very old. Not very, said Uncle Paul. I counted its layers. It had 170. 170, Uncle Paul. Honest and truly? Honest and truly, my little friend, 170. Then the beech was 170 years old, said Jules. Is it possible a tree to grow so old? And no doubt it would have lived many years longer if the road mender had not cut it down to widen the road. For us, 170 years would certainly be a great age, assented his uncle. No one lives so long. For a tree, it is very little. Let us sit down in the shade. I have more to tell you about the age of trees. The age of trees. Here is a picture that is called Cedar of Lebanon. Illustration by an unknown artist. The age of trees. They used to tell of a chestnut of Sancerre, whose trunk was more than 4 meters around. According to the most moderate estimate, its age must have been 300 or 400 years. Don't cry out at the age of this chestnut. My story is just beginning, and you may be sure that as a narrator who stimulates the curiosity of his audience, I reserve the oldest for the end. Much larger chestnuts are known, for example, that of Neuvecelle on the borders of the Lake of Geneva, and that of Isao in the neighborhood of Montélimar. The first is 13 meters around at the base of the trunk. From the year 1408, it sheltered a hermitage. The story has been testified to. Since then, 4 centuries and a half have passed, adding to its age, and lightning has struck it at different times. No matter, it is still vigorous and full of leaves. The second is a majestic ruin. Its high branches are despoiled. Its trunk, 11 meters round, is plowed with deep crevices, the wrinkles of old age. To tell the age of these two giants is hardly possible. Perhaps it might be reckoned at 1,000 years, and still the two old trees bear fruit. They will not die. 1,000 years! If Uncle had not said it, I should not believe it. This from Jules. Shh! You must listen to the end without saying anything, cautioned his uncle. The largest tree in the world is a chestnut on the slopes of Etna in Sicily. Look at the maps. You will see down there at the extreme end of Italy, opposite the toe of that beautiful country, which has the shape of a boot, a large island with 3 corners. That is Sicily. On that island is a celebrated mountain which throws up burning matter, a volcano, in short. It is called Etna. To come back to our chestnut, I must tell you that they call it the chestnut of 100 horses, because Jane, Queen of Aragon, visiting the volcano one day and overtaken by a storm, took refuge under it with her escort of 100 horsemen. Under its forest of leaves, both riders and horses found shelter. To surround the giant, 30 people extending their arms and joining hands would not be enough. The trunk is more than 50 meters round. Judged by its size, it is less a tree trunk than a fortress, a tower. An opening large enough to permit 2 carriages to pass abreast goes through the base of the chestnut and gives access into the cavity of the trunk, which is fitted up for the use of those who go to gather chestnuts. For the old colossus still has young sap and seldom fails to bear fruit. It is impossible to estimate the age of this giant by its size, for one suspects that the trunk as large as that comes from several chestnuts originally distinct, but so near together that they have become welded into one. Neustadt in Württemberg has a linden whose branches, overburdened by years, are held up by 100 pillars of masonry. The branches cover altogether a space of 130 meters in circumference. In 1229 this tree was already old, for writers of that time call it the Big Linden. Its probable age today is 700 or 800 years. There was, in France at the beginning of this century, an older tree than the veteran of Neustadt. In 1804 could be seen at the castle of Chailly in the Deux-Sèvres a linden 15 meters around. It had 6 main branches propped with numerous pillars. If it still exists, it cannot be less than 11 centuries old. The cemetery of Allouville in Normandy is shaded by one of the oldest oaks in France. The dust of the dead into which it has thrust its roots seems to have given it an exceptional vigor. Its trunk measures 10 meters in circumference at the base. A hermit's chamber surmounted by a little steeple rises in the midst of its enormous branches. The base of the trunk, partly hollow, is fitted up as a chapel dedicated to Our Lady of Peace. The greatest personages have esteemed it an honor to go and pray in this rustic sanctuary and meditate a moment under the shade of the old tree which has seen so many graves open and shut. According to its size, they consider this oak to be about 900 years old. The acorn that produced it must then have germinated about the year 1000. Today, the old oak carries its monstrous branches without effort. Glorified by men and ravaged by lightning, it peacefully follows the courses of ages, perhaps having before it a future equal to its past. Much older oaks are known. In 1824, a woodcutter of Ardennes felled a gigantic oak in whose trunk were found sacrificial vases and antique coins. The old oak had 15 or 16 centuries of existence. After the Allouville oak, I will tell you of some more companions of the dead, for it is above all in these fields of repose where the sanctity of the place protects them against the injuries of man. that trees attain such an advanced age. Two yews in the cemetery of Aix de Ruteau, department of Eure, merit attention above all. In 1832, they shaded with their foliage the whole of the field of the dead and a part of the church, without having experienced serious damage, when an extremely violent windstorm threw a part of their branches to the ground. In spite of this mutilation, these two yews are still majestic old trees. Their trunks, entirely hollow, measure each of them 9 meters in circumference. Their age is estimated at 1400 years. That, however, is not more than half the age that some other trees of the same kind have attained. A yew in a Scotch cemetery measured not 29 meters around. Its probable age was 2,500 years. Another yew, also in a cemetery in the same country, was in 1660 so prodigious that the whole country was talking about it. They reckoned its age then at 2,824 years. If it is still standing, this patriarch of European trees bears the weight of more than 30 centuries. Enough for the present. Now it is your turn to talk. I like better to be silent, Uncle Paul, said Jules. You have upset my mind with your trees that will not die. I am thinking of the old yew in the Scotch cemetery. Did you say 3,000 years? Asked Claire. 3,000 years, my dear child, and we might go still further back. If I were to tell you of certain trees in foreign countries, some are known to be almost as old as the world. Okay, now go and find the other video that's been uploaded that's about the tree of the 100 horsemen.